Good morning. Welcome to this week's edition of What's Going On with Outgrow Your Garage. This week we are talking to Helen West from the City of Cortez about building business ecosystems from scratch. And I am really excited about this. Helen and I have worked together in a whole bunch of different capacities for a long time now. And I really love the work that they're doing down in Cortez, Colorado, about how to help a really pretty diverse group of entrepreneurs solve a whole bunch of really interesting logistical problems. And so I will let Helen introduce herself and what she does down in Cortez.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Helen. I live here in Cortez, and I am the community and economic development specialist here. And I work with a range of businesses. I do everything from one-on-one support with businesses, warm handoffs to different agencies or different parts of the city, event management, marketing, grant writing, grant management, all sorts of different things. But I like to say that my primary role is the liaison between the city and our business community. So if businesses have a question about anything under the sun, I might not be the right person to answer that, but I'm here to help them get connected with someone who can.
Excellent. And so Cortez, for anybody who's not familiar with Cortez, because you're a pretty small town, Cortez is down in Southwest Colorado, and you are pretty close to Mesa Verde National Park, and you're also pretty close to a couple of different local indigenous tribes. And so tell us a little bit about like the makeup of Cortez. What is Cortez like?
Yeah, and actually, this is something kind of new for me, but I worked on the Navajo reservation as a school teacher down there for many years, and so I do want to just recognize the Navajo tribe that is here, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe that is here, and of course the ancestral Puebloans who have deep ties to this region. There are many, many different modern tribes that come from the Puebloans, but just want to honor that. And then also just a little bit of background about myself. In Navajo tradition, you're supposed to give your clans as white people. I don't have a particular clan, but I grew up in Southeast Alaska. My mom and dad are both from the United States of America. My genealogy way back when it comes from Ireland and Germany mostly. So pretty white through and through, but have been in Cortez. My family's been here since 2012. And then I moved back permanently in 2018. So, Cortez is a funny place. We have a lot of people, like our indigenous brothers and sisters, who trace ancestry back for millennia. And then we have some old time ranchers and agricultural folk that trace back several, 5 or 6 generations. So I am definitely not a local, even though I've been here for a couple of years. I do want to, unless you're born and raised and die in Cortez, you are not a local. So there's definitely that kind of old West rural environment. Cortez is a relatively diverse place in Colorado. Jesse and I were talking about the coasts. I went to college in Washington, D.C., which is an incredibly diverse city. So moving to Colorado was kind of shocking. We're much less diverse than the coastal cities. That being said, Cortez, it has a very diverse population of Hispanic folk. We have a lot of indigenous community members, a lot of white folk. And like I was saying, that ranges from people who just moved here to people who have been here for generations. We also are relatively diverse politically. Colorado has become more and more of a Democratic stronghold. But in the rural areas, as you know, Jesse, that we have a lot more political diversity in opinions and thoughts. And I love working rurally. I think that people just have an understanding of there's a more nuanced approach to what we need and what we want than sometimes I see, especially on the political landscape in the big cities. So it's a really interesting, diverse community in all facets.
Yeah. And I love having, and that's part of what I like about working in rural areas. As you know, Outgrow Your Garage does really specialize in kind of some of these rural towns, which is funny for me because I grew up in Philadelphia, which is very, very decidedly not at all rural. But I left at 18 and I moved to a town in upstate New York of 4,000. And I went, yeah, I'm good here. I never want to live in a bigger place ever again. And I've kind of been going, I went smaller for a long time until I lived in a town in California of 37, which I discovered 37 with a 50-mile round trip to the grocery store over a mountain pass or down 7,000 feet. absolutely my ideal. That was perfect. Um,
Oh,
Loved
maybe it's
it.
a little
Thought
too
it was
small for
great. Yeah.
me, but
And most people are like that. And my spouse is also like that. So that's why we live in Delta now, which is a nice compromise of a little under 10,000. We're just outside of town. You can get to the grocery store. I was joking yesterday about we were driving back from Texas, and we were driving between Montrose and Gunnison, which is where the Black Canyon is, and it's a pretty rural area, and there's really only one road, Highway 50 through the canyon, and when it's closed and you don't have a good way around it. And he was like, oh, it was so pretty here. And I was like, we could live here. And he was like, no, I'm not driving over a path to go to the grocery store. And I was like, no, you just go once. It's fine. And then you have all your groceries for 4 months. And he was like, or not. What if we didn't do that?
I
Um, because
think
that's
I'm
how
on
it
your
goes.
husband's train.
Lots of people are. And I think that's the important thing about, I think a lot of people don't understand how rural works, where there is very different pieces of how rural is that scale. Urban is kind of urban. You have all the things you need, and maybe some cities have more museums and other cities have more theater or whatever. You have a clear industry, but rural communities, they're pretty diverse in how they're rural. They're not all rural in the same way. Some of them are very tiny. Some of them are big compared to other rural towns. Some of them have one industry, right? Some of them have a lot of different industries. Some of them, like Cortez, are a little bit on the seasonal side, where you get a lot of tourists in the summertime and then not as much in the wintertime.
Yeah,
Um,
I think Cortez is kind of talking about how different rural is really interesting. I got married a couple years ago, and I had a lot of friends from Washington, D.C. from college come, and they were like, wow, you live in the middle of nowhere. And I know that Cortez is categorized as rural in terms of Colorado, but sometimes I have a hard time talking about Cortez as truly rural because we're right next to Durango. We're about 45 minutes from a Home Depot. If you turn around and drive the other way to Farmington, you can get a Lowe's and a Home Depot. And like, yes, it's rural. We have less than 10,000 people in our town, less than 30,000 people in the entire county, lots of wide open spaces, but we're right next to several different national parks. There's a lot of drive through. When you go to places like the San Luis Valley, that's rural to me. Like you are
right.
out in the middle of nowhere. There is no Home Depot for several like hundreds of miles. There's no Walmart. There's no grocery stores, large grocery stores, name brand grocery stores. Um, but comparatively, yeah, I guess Cortez is rural. It's just not rural for rural. Yeah.
Right. So when you think about that, all of those kind of different businesses and the way that people come in, and to some extent, the way that people come in from more urban areas to go to your national parks or to go to these really cool, spectacular outdoor recreation resources that you have around Cortez, even just like boating, like you're not too far from the Navajo Dam, and you have this huge boating things, which I saw for the first time last year when we incidentally drove from Delta to Farmington. Uh, and um, and so how do you, when you think about that from a local government perspective, how do you set those priorities of how you want to think about economic development to meet those really dispersed needs on an overall ecosystem building level?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really complicated question. And Cortez is a unique place. Sometimes I feel that we as a city are 10 years behind everyone else. Just, we still have paper applications that you have to turn in person. You can't turn them in online. So we're just a little bit behind, and we Cortez wants to grow sustainably. Like we want, right? We as economic developers know that without growth in our current system, you die as a town. And so we want to grow, but we want to grow in a way that doesn't overpower the natural beauty that we have, the rural feel that we have, the wide open spaces. There's a phrase that we don't want to become Durango or Moab. We don't want to be overrun with tourists. We want a little bit, we want a little more. We maybe want some new, younger people to move into town to create new businesses and new jobs, but we don't want too many. And so, how do you create those positions for someone to move into that are affordable, that they have a an income that they can live off of and enjoy our area and give back to the community through their own purchases of different goods. But also, how do you not bring in too much? So I feel like Cortez is still kind of discussing about what we want to become. Historically, we've been a large, I mean, for millennia, people have been here to farm. The Puebloans came to farm, the Navajo and Ute moved in to farm, Hispanic folk moved into farm, and then, of course, the white folk came into farm. So agriculture, we have a huge historical agricultural industry here in Cortez, but it's lessening. Our generation, the millennials, are not as interested in farming. Also, farming is really hard in today's world to make a living, especially as a small farm. And unfortunately, a lot of the young farmers and older farmers we see, one of the partners has to have a job outside of farming, usually in some kind of government role, so you can get the health care and the insurance and all the things that you need. But that person really wants to be either a stay-at-home parent or another farmer. They don't want to be going into town every day to go to this job that they're forced to do because they need all these other things. And how do we prop up that business? Um, it's really complicated. I also, so kind of talking about our agricultural, then oil and gas came in, and we have one of the largest CO2 reservoirs here that has been pulling CO2 from the ground from Kinder Morgan. And that is, oil and gas is just going away. It's not a renewable resource. It ends at some point. And so Cortez had a lot of strong jobs during that kind of oil boom, CO2 natural resource boom. And as those resources deplenish in this area, what do we do next? What kind of industry can we bring to Cortez or encourage in Cortez in our area to support those industry manufacturing jobs that are leaving as oil and gas and other natural resources deplenish? That's a conversation. And it's a hard conversation because also then we're in a rural area. We have a couple pretty major shipping routes, but we don't have trains. Our airport is pretty small, so we could do some airport shipping, but that's not an infrastructure that has really developed yet. Again, no train system to get freight out of here. So what kind of industry can we entice to come to Cortez? Water is always an issue in the Western United States. Do we have enough water to support an industry that moves in? There's a lot of things to think about rurally.
Yeah, and the lack of trains in Western Colorado is a personal soapbox that I am on all the time. And I'm sure you've heard me on this soapbox because I am on it all the time. I am down in southwestern Colorado all the time. I travel across the Western Slope, and across the Western United States. And man, if I could take a train, my heart would be so happy if I could take a train because even just that passenger rail would be huge. Just the ability to get from um, Denver to the southwestern United States by something other than car would be really helpful. Because even the buses are a little bit disjointed. I can't get from Delta to Cortez by bus, but I can get from Delta to Durango by bus.
Right.
And so really it is sort of disjointed on that just straight up transportation logistics. And it is kind of one of those things that like you really can't solve at a city level, right? That needs to be kind of a
Or
state
even
or
a state
federal.
level.
Right.
I mean, I was in a conference with our friends down in Farmington, and there is a exploration from a train route from Gallup up all the way to, I think, Grand Junction that would potentially go through a southern part of Durango or Cortez. I mean, and that, when they started that project 10 years ago, and I'm going to quote the numbers wrong, but it was probably a $3 million project. It is now like a $50 billion project. And I mean, the environmental clearances you need, and I don't think people understand that a passenger train is very different than a freight train. And you don't really want them running, you have to be very precise and not running at the same time, and sometimes not even running on the same tracks. And do we have the market study to even support a passenger train? One of the things I think a lot about transportation, I love transportation. Part of me wishes I had gone into more of a transportation planning role. Um, the East Coast of the United States is a great place to have trains because it's so interconnected, right? There's so many, and to get from Philadelphia to New York is not that far. To get from Denver to Albuquerque is a long ways. And we all have cars. So why would we develop the train routes when we all have cars, most people have cars, not all of us, but most people have cars to get from place A to place B. And that route is so much longer. Some people are going from Denver to Albuquerque, but some people are going from Denver to Grand Junction or Denver to Durango or Durango to Cortez. And suddenly, does it make sense to have a train route stop every 20 minutes when you have a 10-hour train route? It's a really complicated issue that I think we need to think of out of the box as a nation. And it's also, like you said, and that's another frustrating thing about being rural is a lot of our problems that we have, our infrastructure problems, we don't have the sales tax dollars to support fixing. We don't have, as Cortez, we're not going to build a train route to Durango because that would involve the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, the city of Durango, the county of La Plata, Montezuma County, Mancos, Dolores, Cortez towns, not to mention the tribes, but region, right? So all of a sudden you're getting into all these different agencies that I think people forget that local government is its own thing, but we also have all these other people and all these other agencies that we have to work with to solve these regional issues and regional problems. And that takes time and money.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so kind of on that note, I think you made a really good point about the sales tax thing, right? Where when you're looking at providing both city resources, but then also resources for your economic development owners and where your business is, a lot of people go, okay, but like it is economic development is creating resources for businesses and supporting new businesses in the community. And as you pointed out, resources cost dollars, whether those dollars are coming from grants, whether they're coming from other local businesses that are pitching in for specific projects, whether they're coming from foundations, however, whether they're coming from sales tax. So how do you fund the work that you want to do? Well, actually, let's back up a little bit. What are your resources that you are supporting new businesses and existing businesses? And then where does the funding for those projects come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was trying to look up some data I have. I should have prepared a little more for that. But Cortez, we have a lot of folks that live in poverty. We have a pretty high poverty rate, especially when compared to the state average. So we have diminished purchasing power, right? We have a lot of people struggling to get by and make it. And so for our sales tax dollars, and sales tax generally goes into the general fund, so it funds most of the local government projects, everything from paving roads, building bridges, to employing our police force, and local government staff like myself. So sales tax is really the primary way we fund ourselves here in the city of Cortez, along with grants, right? So applying for state and federal grants is really important, using that dollar for dollar match against the power of the funding power of the federal government has been really important for the city of Cortez. Um, and unfortunately, we have a lot of issues. As we talked a little bit, we have a lot of infrastructure problems. We have water mains that are breaking under our streets. We have streets that haven't been paved for several years. So when people talk about, well, we want more incentive programs for new businesses, it's a cost and benefit analysis. Like, okay, do you want incentive programs for for-profit businesses or do you want your roads paved? Because we don't have the funds to do both. And so typically, my job is really trying to create out of the box ideas or connect local businesses with other programs that can help them. We have a couple in city programs. We have a sidewalk cost share that will help fix sidewalks for the city shares 50% of the cost with the property owner. And that's for both residential and businesses. We also have through our lodging tax. So some of the lodging tax that we get from people that stay in hotels and Airbnbs and different things in Cortez, we take that lodging tax and a portion of that goes to a facade improvement grant for our businesses and nonprofits. And that's a 50% match grant. So if you want to paint the side of your building or get a new sign, just make Cortez prettier, you can apply for this grant, and we'll help you do that. That's really the only in-city programs we have. Again, I'm always looking for grants that I can bring in to support our programming. Happy to partner with Outgrow Your Garage on a grant that you guys have to provide a free online platform for our learning platform for our businesses for 6 months. So that's really awesome. So trying to find those kind of free incentives. I see my role in the city as really trying to provide resources for businesses. I don't think the city's job is necessarily to handhold a business through their startup phase. We have incredible partners like the Small Business Development Center, like Outgrow Your Garage, like Region 9, like our chambers that can really support those businesses in that way. So I provide resources. I help businesses find those resources. I can be a warm handoff if someone is applying for a city permit and they don't know how to do that. I can help walk through that government process. But I am not the person to sit down and go over your business plan or help you edit a grant. I also see the government's role within the business community as kind of leveling the playing field or improving the playing field for all businesses. And that can be hard. Um, Partly because of what we were talking about. We don't have the funding power to like create these incredible incentive programs for new businesses or businesses to modernize like you see sometimes in the larger cities. We just don't have that. So I'm always looking for grants that can help support that. Um, but yeah, and I can talk more about kind of that leveling of the playing field if you want, but I don't want to go into too much minutia.
Yeah. No, and I think it's important to mention here is yes, Outgrow Your Garage is providing you with 6 months of programming. And the reason we're able to do that is because we did a project with Downtown Colorado Inc. and they got a grant from the USDA in order to be able to do that. And so ultimately that funding is coming from a federal program that is designed to support rural entrepreneurship and support rural economic growth. And so that to get that funding all the way to Cortez, we went through three different entities for it to get there. And even then, the only reason we were able to do that is because Downtown Colorado and I were very, very judicious in how we used that grant funding. And we had a little bit left over and went, how can we extend the work that we're doing with this grant and make that opportunity? And so, and fun enough, we carved out enough for 4 cities to do it, but we actually ended up with 5. And so I dropped our prices to fit 4 in, and then I did it again to fit 5 because I want to put it out where I can. But it also means we went from making a tiny little profit on that to now we're like just breaking even because I took a fifth city in there, which is fine. I'm happy to do that. And I feel like that is the spirit of that grant to be able to do it. But it also means, as a for profit business, I'm not making money on it, which people are going to have different opinions on whether or not businesses should make money. But ultimately, if I don't make a profit, it is hard for me to provide services because I can't then funnel that into raises for my staff, additional things like my staff does not have health insurance. My staff, I say staff, but they're not, they're contractors. I
Right.
don't have employees. I don't have, and so those different pieces, like that is the reality of doing business sometimes where you make those choices of, I want to do good here, but it means I don't have the capacity to do it over here because at some point I do need to make a profit because I do need to continue to run my business. This grant is not covering the overhead of my business, it's just covering staff time now, which again is a decision I made and I'm happy to do it, but I won't have that resource the next time for something else without other sources of income. And so I think a lot of people get mad sometimes when businesses are like, no, but like we can't actually do that. But like, no, we need to stay in existence also.
Yeah,
Um,
I just want to touch on that. I mean, what you're saying about rural, I see this in rural businesses. I'm sure it happens in urban areas as well, but in my work with some of our rural businesses, they are the most community-minded individuals and they want to donate to the fair and donate, sponsor the kids' soccer match and sponsor something else. But we're also making for-profit businesses that our families are theoretically supposed to be able to live off of, and we have to make an income in order to sustain in that lifestyle. And I want to commend our rural businesses like yours that are really wanting to give back to community. I think that's a beautiful thing about rural. We really band together. We want to make sure that everybody is okay and everybody is supported. And it's hard in our current system. And I think that's shifting that mindset of one thing I try to tell businesses is to be really clear about your mission, right? And even if you're just a local retailer, right, is your mission when you sponsor things, is it going to be specifically giving to youth? Is it going to be specifically for girls, or is it going to be specifically for boys? Is it going to like be clear in your mission? Because then you can say, I support you, but here's my mission. This is, I only sponsor these niche things. Um, would love to, see if you can help them in other ways. But I think being really clear and shifting that mindset of like businesses can make a profit. It's good to make a profit. You're actually helping your community by making a profit, by making a wage for yourself and your employees or your contractors. Like you are giving back. Um, and we have to protect that, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I find is true when I have kind of these broader conversations about small businesses, both in rural and urban communities, we sort of think of culturally business, right? For-profit businesses make these decisions that are anti-community, right? Is a lot of times that narrative because you have these giant corporations like Amazon who come in and pay poor wages and like their jobs, but they're not good jobs, and they don't pay taxes to the communities that they're in, and they advocate for all these different policies that are kind of like pro business, anti the people who live in those communities. But that's really different from how a small business operates, where it does do a lot of that type of community work, and really become the bedrock of how you have a thriving community because you are doing that, and you have that statistic all the time of how a dollar spent in a small business circulates 3 or 4 times around that community before you get it, as opposed to if you buy something on Amazon, those dollars are just gone. And that I think really matters when we think about how rural development works and how you think about it. One of my soapboxes a lot is you have to grow your own internal businesses. You're not always going to be able to lure a business to come into your town to create 30 jobs. Um, and it's a lot easier sometimes to support 10 businesses in your community to create 3 jobs, depending on how you operate and how that gets set up. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember in the broader cultural conversation about what does business mean, because those small businesses, they do have to make a little bit of a profit, and making a profit isn't a bad thing because you have to put your own oxygen mask on first. We all know that
Mhm.
it's hustle culture out there all over the place, and we have this idea that you have to be working all the time, all the time, all the time. But as a small business owner, you can actually say no. I'm going to set my prices at a level that is sustainable, that makes a profit, that I can live on, that my staff can be taken care of, that I can support my community. I can do that, and you can have an enough, and you can take weekends off. My dad was a mechanic in the town that I grew up in, and he didn't work weekends. He just didn't. He was done every day at 5. He worked weekends. He was a business owner. And now there's a lot of pressure to not do that, of like, okay, you have to be open 7 days a week. You have to be open till 8 o'clock at night. Um, and figuring out how to leverage those things of, yes, you do need to have a way for people to drop your car off outside of regular business hours, but you also need to figure out how to spend time with your family and do the things that you love. Because as a business owner, you get to decide that's not how you want to exist in the world. And I love that about working with rural small businesses. That they can be like, yeah, I really want to support this one. I want to support youth soccer. Okay, great. Let's figure out how to set your pricing so that you can support youth soccer. And decide those pieces. I say a lot about Outgrow Your Garage. We support rural business ecosystem development or general ecosystem development. It's not always rural, but it's always kind of marginalized, underserved communities, right? And these communities that don't have access to easy capital, don't necessarily have a rich uncle they can call to talk to about business resources. That's our jam. How do we get more businesses through the first 5 years when they're most likely to fail? How do we help businesses catch up on technology? How do we help them grow? And that means there's a lot of things my business cannot care about that I personally care really, really deeply about. And some of those are causes I've worked for a long time. I was really big in how do you get youth outside. I worked in environmental education for a long time. I want youth to experience outdoor recreation. Outgrow Your Garage as a company does not give money to youth outdoor
Right.
recreation, right? Like we just don't, because we have our focus of we are supporting in this area. And how do we do that? And so I think it's very easy to overextend yourself.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. Especially in yeah, especially in rural and especially in today's culture, it totally is. I just want to plug one of your classes. So on the online learning platform, that pricing your services. really made me think about that for our businesses, about how do you price so that you can, especially in a seasonal place. I know one of our businesses that closes for like the entire month of January because holiday shopping is done and she takes her family to Mexico. I think her husband works a different job, so they have a little bit of disposable income, but like that's awesome. Like we have, holiday shopping is done. The tourists aren't back yet. Why pay for electricity? Shut the whole place down. And so learning how to price that, I mean, this is a retailer, but learning how to price your services so you can get through the slow times, so you can have a little nest egg to go to Mexico or just take a month off of work. I think it's great.
Yeah. And in that course, so funnily you mentioned that kind of seasonal piece. So the budgeting workshop or the budgeting spreadsheet in one of our other courses on budgeting and finances actually has a section for seasonal businesses, right? How do you set your income up in order to save that so that you have that ability? Because if you are in a town that operates on a seasonal income, you really want to be able to do that. I was having that conversation in Victor, Colorado, population 400 a couple weeks ago, where their biggest issue in the wintertime is they have this really cool old historic downtown that people love. You know what historic downtowns don't have? Great insulation and HVAC systems. So it's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
expensive to heat them in the winter. And so that's a calculation that their businesses make about how much to be open in the winter is how many people are going to come into my retail store and purchase things versus what's the cost to heat this building for the day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a calculus that they're going to do all the time. And so really thinking about how do you leverage that um, as as a business and as a community was an ongoing conversation when we were there last week. Shockingly, we did not solve that in a 1 hour listening session, but sometimes it's important to acknowledge the problems that you don't necessarily think of when you're in a little tiny town. Because to your point, a city of 400 does not have the sales tax revenue to, or the income to support an entire Main Street's HVAC pieces,
Yep.
right? Like it's hard. And we run into that here in Delta too, for the same reasons. Our water main system is not big enough to support sprinklers on the second floor of Main Street, which means you can't put apartments above Main Street buildings because modern code requires sprinklers. Okay, great. How do we fix that? Right. So that's a conversation that's happening here in Delta, also one that is a longer term.
Yeah, and I don't know who's listening to this, but just to make a plug to our state representatives, I think that sometimes well-intended regulations that come down from the state, sprinklers, great idea. We should probably have sprinklers so that people don't burn down or the houses don't burn down, right? Like that's awesome. Similarly, I tend to be more environmentally friendly. I support environmental policies, but sometimes in extreme regulations put a damper on our businesses, and they might be well intended. And how do you allow small mom and pop shops and rural businesses to do things that are in the spirit of the law, but maybe not to the exact letter of the law? Because this is partly why we're seeing such an increase in the cost of housing. It costs so much more to build because now we have energy efficiency standards, which again, environmentally friendly. I love the idea, but it just adds a layer. You have a new study you have to do. You have a new test system you have to do, which means you have to up your door. And it's an interesting problem that I find really fascinating. I don't have the answer to, but I do think our state regulations need to think about how those codes impact our small
Mhm.
rural businesses and how much it's going to cost to make their overhead.
Right. And that's true, I think, at the local level too. One of the things
Yeah.
that I was at a landscaping conference earlier this month, and one of the big policy conversations at the landscaping conference was some stuff going on with irrigation that would allow individual cities to manage different water restrictions and do that. And so if you are a mobile business that works in multiple cities, every time a local city changes their regulation, you have to then do it in every city you work in, and you have to keep track of all these things. And so it just adds a level of bureaucracy, and sometimes that does really sound like businesses are anti-environmental regulation, but what they're anti is having to keep track of 17 different regulations, right? The same thing
Yep.
happens with pesticides. It was a huge issue several years ago in Colorado when a couple of individual cities wanted to ban certain pesticides, and the landscaping industry was like, please, dear God, don't do that. And they fought against a law saying that individual cities could do it, not because they were anti changing pesticides, but because they were anti having to keep track of laws in 30 different townships. And so, really thinking about how some of those things bleed over into these small businesses that don't have a lawyer on staff and don't have those different pieces. And so, I find policy so interesting in general for that exact reason of it um, doesn't always mesh with
Yeah,
rural and urban. It's a really hard problem, and you can't
it
solve all
is.
the things. Things are always going to work for some people and not work for other people, and
Yeah,
that is just the reality of having a lot of people.
yeah.
I mean, sometimes in my own house, my husband is 14 inches taller than me, which means there's nothing that ever works for both of us. Like we try to buy a car and he's like, my head hits the ceiling. And I'm like, but I can't reach the other side of the dashboard. Like we can't even buy a car in my own house that works for both of us. So, policy, policy and making things work for a statewide constituent
Yeah,
sounds really
totally.
hard.
It is.
Um,
And something I've been thinking a lot about lately is I think life is about tension. Like we're trying to live knowing we're going to die. And I think everything resolves around that. Like there's always tension. That's part of being alive.
right. Yeah, and it's fun to find. I really like figuring out, okay, what's the next steps and how do you find stuff that works, right? How do you get those pieces? Anyway, we are coming up on time. Um, in my ongoing effort to keep these at less than 45 minutes.
Nice.
Um, what are things that people should know about the city of Cortez? How do people in Cortez find out about resources? How do other cities struggling with the same thing kind of keep track of how you're thinking about issues? What do you want people to know?
Yeah, so I think for businesses interesting in like learning more about Cortez, we have a new landing page, www.cortezco.gov/95/business. I don't know why 95 is in there. That's just the way the world, like our website works. But this kind of is a landing page. It'll soon have my and my boss's contact information on there, but it has just a list of all these different programs we have for businesses or those resources I was discussing. So that's one. If you want to stay involved in the city, if you are in the city on that list, there should be a way to sign up for, we have a newsletter I send out very, very irregularly. Usually, oh, this grant is coming up, or oh, Outgrow Your Garage has a free learning platform, sign up. That's how to stay involved with Cortez and the business community. I think if you like want to be connected with local government and what we're doing and how we're thinking about things is, I mean, as you know, Jesse, just really joining conversations. We have multiple different meetings. Region 9 is a great place. They facilitate a lot of different conversations. EDCC, the Economic Development Council of Colorado. Am I saying that? I don't remember.
I think so.
EDC, yeah. EDC, DCI, like there's a lot of different conversations that we're just a part of. Um, and you can always call me. But
Yeah, and I'll drop those links to the SBDC and Region 9 and
awesome.
EDCC and DCI into the chat for anybody else who's looking for those types of resources on that broader economic development level. Um, Thanks for coming on the show. Next week, I just looked at our calendar and we actually don't have a guest next week unless I drum one up in the next pieces. And so what will probably happen is I will do a live stream all on my own to see if I have solved some of these issues of why we can't get the live streaming to work. So that will probably be my Wednesday at 10 a.m. What's going on with how do you start a video YouTube channel and manage the tech issues of it, particularly when you're not a video person. So yeah, so that'll be that. This will be posted hopefully later today, if not today, tomorrow. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And lovely. I love your backdrop, by the way. That it's really
Thanks.
cute.
Thank you to the decal world of people who make really cool big stickers that I can just put on my wall in my office.
That's awesome. All right. Take care, Jesse.